Meet James Walker, a calm, well-dressed man with quiet confidence, standing at Gate B12 of one of America's busiest airports. But what begins as a normal boarding call turns into a national firestorm when a flight attendant abruptly stops him and his wife, Lauren, from boarding first class. No real reason, just a gut feeling. As cameras roll and whispers turn into headlines, James faces a dilemma far bigger than a boarding pass. This isn't just about a seat on a plane, it's about dignity, truth, and justice. What happens when quiet strength meets systemic injustice in front of the whole world? How far will one couple go to challenge not just humiliation, but a broken system? Stay with us as we unravel a story of grace under fire, of standing firm when falsely accused, and the ripple effect that ignites national change. If you believe stories like this need to be seen, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's build a world that listens, learns, and transforms, one story at a time. It was just another Tuesday at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Terminal buzzing, coffee lines trailing, gate announcements overlapping like static in the air. Gate B12 was quiet but filled with that familiar tension of travelers waiting to board first class. James Walker adjusted his blazer and glanced at his wife Lauren, who smiled softly beneath her caramel curls. This trip was important. Not for the destination, but for what it meant. A break, a beginning. Then it happened. "Excuse me," said the flight attendant, stepping in front of them as they approached the boarding line. "I need you to step aside for just a moment." Her tone was too light to be casual, too rehearsed to be random. James blinked. "We're in Group 1, he said, holding up his ticket, "seats 2A and 2B. "I understand," the attendant replied coolly, glancing at the boarding pass without really looking. Her name tag read Emily. "There's just a situation I need to clarify. Please wait over here." Lauren's hand tightened on James's arm. Others began to stare. A man in a golf cap leaned out of line. A teenager raised his phone, tilting it just enough to begin filming. James could feel it. The invisible wall forming. The subtle shift from traveler to suspect. "What kind of situation?" Lauren asked gently but firmly. Emily avoided her eyes. "There may be an issue with your ticket. It could be a technical error." James exhaled slowly, holding back the heat rising in his chest. "You scanned every passenger in front of us without a word. We've flown with this airline more times than I can count. Is there really an issue, or just a feeling?" Emily stiffened. Passengers murmured. A woman seated nearby pulled her toddler closer. The tension grew thicker than the Atlanta humidity outside. Then, from the far side of the terminal, came a voice of calm authority. "Is there a problem here?" Karen Mitchell, the airline's senior gate supervisor, walked up with the kind of presence that settled chaos before it fully unraveled. Late 40s, composed, eyes sharp behind designer glasses. Emily straightened. "I was just double-checking these passengers' credentials. Something didn't seem right." Karen turned to James and Lauren. "May I see your boarding passes?" James handed them over without a word. Karen scanned the QR codes, brows lifting slightly. "These are valid. Booked first class, direct to San Francisco. No issues flagged in the system." There was a pause. A long one. Karen turned slowly to Emily. "Feeling something is not the same as policy, and you know that." Emily flushed. I didn't mean—" Karen held up her hand. "Let's talk privately." Lauren let out a quiet breath. James touched the small of her back and led her toward the boarding line again, though his hands trembled ever so slightly. Behind them, murmurs grew louder. A few passengers clapped. A man whispered, "About time." But James didn't feel vindicated. He felt exposed, like a lesson had just begun. By the time James and Lauren Walker buckled their seatbelts in row 2A and 2B, the cabin air felt thick with something more than recycled oxygen. They weren't just boarding a plane anymore, they were carrying the weight of what had just happened at gate B12. And somewhere behind them, voices still whispered. James stared blankly out the window, his mind racing. "She didn't even check the guy ahead of us," he muttered, barely audible. Lauren touched his hand gently. "I know, babe." Her voice was soft, but there was steel in it. Across the aisle, a middle-aged white couple exchanged glances, then looked away quickly when James caught their eyes. A young man, 2 rows back, was still fiddling with his phone. The red recording dot blinked before he tucked it under his tray. It had begun. Back at the gate, Karen Mitchell stood in the employee corridor, her arms crossed as she looked at Emily Thompson with a calm that carried an edge. "Emily, I'm going to ask you once, and I want a clear answer. What exactly made you single them out?" Emily's lips trembled slightly. "It just didn't feel right. Their clothes, the way he walked up. I thought maybe they were confused or using someone else's tickets." "You thought," Karen repeated slowly, "but didn't check the tickets until after you stopped them. And when you did, they were valid." Look, I didn't mean it like that. It's not about race." Karen's eyebrows lifted, her expression unreadable. "Emily, you need to understand something. Feeling off isn't a policy. Profiling passengers, especially based on implicit bias, is a serious accusation, and it's becoming very public." She tilted her head toward the employee monitor, where social media had already erupted. The first video had 20,000 views in under 10 minutes. One tweet read, "Black couple harassed at ATL gate for flying first class while black. This isn't security, it's discrimination." Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Her face drained of color. Karen's phone rang. She answered curtly. "Mitchell?" A pause. "Yes. I see. Understood." She hung up and turned to Emily. "Corporate's seen the video. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation. Leave your badge at the desk and don't return to the terminal without clearance." Emily blinked rapidly, fighting to keep tears from spilling over. "I was just trying to do my job." "Then maybe," Karen said, voice cool, "you need to relearn what your job actually is." Meanwhile, on the plane, the atmosphere had shifted. A flight attendant named Erica approached James and Lauren with quiet dignity. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," she said softly, "I just wanted to apologize for what happened at the gate. That's not how we treat guests, not how we treat anyone." James hesitated, searching her face. She looked sincere. "We appreciate you saying that," Lauren replied, nodding. Erica leaned in slightly. "If there's anything you need during the flight, anything, we're here for you." As she walked away, James finally turned to Lauren. "Did we just become a story?" Lauren looked down at her phone. Her screen lit up with notifications. One text from her sister read, "Sis, are you trending? Just saw you on Twitter." She turned the phone to show him the video. There they were, his furrowed brow, her calm strength, the still frame of Emily blocking their path. The caption hit hard. "This is why people film everything." James closed his eyes. "This isn't just about us," he whispered. Lauren nodded, her voice nearly a prayer. "It never was." The plane had reached cruising altitude, but James Walker felt like he was still stuck at the gate, stuck in that humiliating moment, looped like a bad memory with the volume turned all the way up. From his seat, he could hear hushed conversations. The woman across the aisle mouthed something to her husband. A flight attendant walked by slower than necessary. James wasn't sure if it was empathy or morbid curiosity behind all the glances. Maybe both. Lauren noticed the change in him. "You're getting that look," she said gently, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "What look?" he asked, not looking at her. "The one you used to get before you testified in court, when the pressure builds and you don't let it out." He exhaled slowly. "I'm tired, Lo." "I know," she whispered, her thumb brushing his knuckle. "But we've been tired before, and we didn't stop then." A few rows back, someone coughed loudly, on purpose. Phones were still out, screens dimmed, filming discreetly. James leaned toward his wife, his voice low but deliberate. "We didn't ask to be examples." Lauren nodded. "But here we are." Suddenly, the intercom beeped. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be experiencing some minor turbulence over the next 15 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The seatbelt light chimed. The cabin dimmed slightly. A moment later, Karen Mitchell boarded the aircraft. She'd been rushed in just before the doors closed, at corporate's request. Now she was moving down the aisle, composed but tight-lipped. She approached Erica, the kind flight attendant who had apologized earlier, and whispered something in her ear. Erica's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded and walked toward the back. Karen then stepped forward, directly to James and Lauren's row. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker?" she said quietly, her voice respectful. "May I have a moment?" James hesitated, but Lauren gave a subtle nod. Karen crouched slightly to meet their eye level. "I want to first say that I saw the footage. All of it. And I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry." James studied her face, measuring her words, her tone. "I've been in aviation for 17 years, Karen continued, "and I've seen a lot of things swept under the rug. I won't let this be one of them." Lauren's eyes welled with restrained emotion. "Thank you for saying that." Karen leaned in just slightly. "Corporate has asked me to relay that an investigation has already begun, and I've personally asked that the footage be reviewed before the end of the day. Ms. Thompson has been suspended." James inhaled sharply. "Suspended?" "For now," Karen clarified, "but there will be consequences. I promise you that." As Karen stood, a man in business class suddenly stood as well. Mid-40s, salt-and-pepper hair, Armani suit. He turned toward James and nodded respectfully. "What happened back there," he said, loud enough for several rows to hear, "should have never happened. You handled it with grace. I'm not sure I could have mustered." Others murmured in agreement. "I appreciate that," James replied, his voice cracking slightly. "But it's not about grace. It's about being seen." And with that, the silence that had filled the cabin began to shift. Not entirely comfortable yet, but something was changing. A reckoning, maybe, or just the start of one. Back in the terminal, Emily Thompson sat in the break room, her hands shaking as she gripped a lukewarm cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed every 30 seconds. Notifications, missed calls, unknown numbers. The headlines were spreading like wildfire. Atlanta couple. Profiled at Gate B12. Airline responds. Flight attendant suspended after viral video sparks outrage. She threw her phone down, breathing heavily. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Had she? The plane hummed softly, but inside Emily Thompson's head, the noise was deafening. She sat stiffly on a bench just outside the HR office at Atlanta International. Her fingers clutched a disposable coffee cup she hadn't sipped in over an hour. Her reflection in the glass opposite her looked like a stranger. Eyes red-rimmed, jaw clenched tight, the smile she practiced every morning now impossible to summon. A corporate investigator finally called her in. "Ms. Thompson," he said flatly, offering a seat across from him in a glass-walled room. "I assume you know why you're here?" Emily nodded. "Please walk me through your decision-making process." She hesitated. Her voice trembled. They didn't look like they belonged in first class. The investigator blinked slowly. "Did their boarding passes indicate otherwise?" "Yes, but sometimes people fake them, or borrow them. I've seen it before." He didn't blink this time. Did you question the white couple who boarded just before them? Emily's jaw locked. Number. But they didn't give me that feeling. That feeling, he repeated. Let's be clear. You singled out a black couple, both professionally dressed with valid documentation because you had a feeling. Emily's shoulders hunched, her words barely audible. It wasn't malicious? He set his pen down. Intent does not erase impact. Outside the room, the story had already become headline news. Meanwhile, on board, James stared out the window, his thoughts cloudy but alive with purpose. Lauren rested her head gently on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded slowly. "Not really, but I know what we have to do." Lauren sat up. "Go public?" "Not for clout," he clarified, "but because silence keeps this cycle spinning." He pulled out his phone, scrolling past hundreds of reposts, clips, hashtags. "Do we post?" she asked. "No," James replied. "We document, carefully. This isn't just about us. It's about how many others this has happened to without cameras around." A few rows ahead, a teenage girl peeked over her seat, wide-eyed and curious. Lauren smiled gently at her, and the girl smiled back, timidly. "They're watching," Lauren said quietly. "And not just the adults." Back at the airport, Karen Mitchell paced the operations office, still in uniform, phone to her ear. "Yes, I understand the optics," she said into the receiver, "but this isn't about optics. It's about accountability. The couple was publicly humiliated, and we, our brand, have to own that." She paused, listening as legal pushed back. "No, suspending her isn't enough. Our customers are already mobilizing. If we don't act with integrity, they'll write us off. Permanently." She hung up and exhaled, her hand briefly trembling as she rubbed her temple. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Erica, the younger attendant who had helped defuse the incident. "I just wanted to say," Erica began nervously, "that what you did, standing up to her in the moment, it mattered. It mattered to them. And to me." Karen smiled faintly. "Thank you. We don't always get to choose our moments, but we do get to choose how we show up in them." In a nearby hotel lobby, Emily sat across from her older sister, Rebecca, a lawyer, always composed. "I don't get it," Emily whispered, barely holding back tears. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Rebecca stared at her, unmoved. "Emily, this didn't start today. I told you last year. You have biases you refuse to confront. You don't get to weaponize gut feelings anymore." Emily's voice rose. "So what? I'm a racist now." "I didn't say that," Rebecca said calmly. "But you used power you didn't understand. And now people are watching. Your apology, if you make one, better come from a place of growth, not damage control." Emily buried her face in her hands. Back in the sky. As turbulence rocked the cabin briefly, James held Lauren's hand tightly, not from fear of falling, but from the weight of what came next. When they landed, everything would change. But for once, he felt ready. The landing gear thudded softly beneath them, but the weight in James's chest felt heavier. As the flight taxied toward the gate at Chicago O'Hare, Lauren turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Are we ready for this?" He looked past her, through the oval window, and caught sight of the waiting area. A small cluster of media had already gathered. Lights, microphones, some held signs, "Justice in the Skies," "Had Gate 12," and camera flashes pierced the glass. James inhaled deeply. "We don't really have a choice anymore." The intercom buzzed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago," the captain announced with a carefully neutral tone. "We hope you had a pleasant flight." Lauren exhaled with a soft scoff. "Pleasant? Sure." As they stood to gather their carry-ons, a flight attendant, someone new, not Emily, approached them gently. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" she said softly. There's a private escort waiting for you at the gate. Airline leadership is requesting a meeting, if you're open to it." James nodded cautiously. "We'll listen." The attendant smiled, not performatively, but earnestly. "Thank you for your grace. On behalf of the staff, I'm really sorry." At gate C-19, the air outside the plane was buzzing with tension and anticipation. As James and Lauren stepped out, phones lifted like a rising tide. Journalists surged forward. One asked, "Do you believe this was racially motivated?" Another shouted, "Will you press charges?" James didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he led Lauren through the crowd as airport security gently cleared a path. A tall man in a navy suit waited just past the chaos. Michael Anderson, Senior VP of Customer Relations. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I'm so sorry for what happened today," he said, extending a hand. "We'd like to speak in a more private setting. The CEO himself is requesting a conversation." Lauren eyed him sharply. "This isn't just about smoothing things over, is it?" Michael shook his head. "It's about listening and fixing what's broken." In a quiet executive lounge nearby, the couple sat across from Anderson and two other airline executives. "We've reviewed the footage," Michael began solemnly. "It's clear that you were targeted unfairly. Emily Thompson's actions were not in line with our values." James folded his hands. "It wasn't just about us. That gate, that moment, it's a mirror for how people like us are treated every day, whether we have first-class tickets or not." Lauren added, "You can't correct this with a press statement. If your system lets someone's gut override documented facts, then the system needs to change." There was silence. Heavy, honest. Michael nodded slowly. "We agree, and we're prepared to take action, but we want your input." James raised an eyebrow. "You're asking us to do your job for you?" "No," Michael replied, his voice steady. "We're asking you to help shape something better. Public accountability, bias training, and transparent hiring protocols. We want your voice in those conversations." Lauren exchanged a glance with James. Something in her eyes shifted. Less anger, more resolve. "We'll consider it," she said. Back in Atlanta, Emily sat in her apartment, phone clutched in trembling hands. Dozens of voicemails, hundreds of messages, old classmates, colleagues, strangers. And then, an email from the airline's HR. Subject line, "Immediate termination, pending final review." She read the line 3 times, her stomach hollowing out. In that moment, she wasn't angry. She was terrified. Not of losing her job, but of losing the version of herself she believed in. Her sister Rebecca's words echoed. "You used power you didn't understand." She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. For the first time in her life, Emily wasn't sure who she really was, or what she was capable of becoming. Back in their hotel room overlooking downtown Chicago, James sat near the window, quietly scrolling through his phone. Notifications kept coming. Tags, comments, DMs, news alerts. Their faces were everywhere now. Lauren entered the room, her eyes tired but focused. "My mom called," she said softly. "She's proud of how we handled it. Said she saw us on CNN." James looked up, his gaze heavy with thought. "It's gone national." Lauren took a seat beside him. "So, what now? We met with the airline, we said our piece." James shook his head. That was just the beginning. She studied him for a long moment, gently brushing his hand. "You're thinking about doing more." He finally turned to her, his voice low but firm. "I don't want to be some viral moment that fades away in a week. This isn't just about what happened to us. It's about how many times this has happened to people who didn't have cameras rolling." Lauren nodded slowly, eyes glinting with something deeper. Resolve, maybe. "Then we document it. All of it." That night, they set up a small camera and recorded a message. Just them. No PR polish, no agenda. Lauren spoke first, her voice clear but trembling with vulnerability. My name is Lauren Carter. My husband, James, and I were traveling home to Atlanta when we were stopped from boarding a flight we had every right to be on. James continued, This wasn't the first time something like this has happened to us, and we know it won't be the last. But this time, you all saw it, and that visibility means something. Lauren leaned in. We're not here to cancel anyone. We're here to change something. For our kids, for your kids, for everyone. By morning, the video had over 3 million views. It wasn't just going viral, it was starting conversations. Teachers, flight attendants, corporate leaders, and everyday people weighed in. Some sent support. Some sent stories of their own. Some, of course, sent hate. But the signal cut through the noise. At a coffee shop across the street, James sat with an old friend, Marcus Dean, a journalist at the Chicago Tribune. You've struck a chord, Marcus said, pushing his glasses up. People don't just want your story, they want a movement. James chuckled lightly, running a hand over his scalp. I never saw myself as a movement leader, man. I run an accounting firm. I barely lead lunch meetings. Marcus leaned in. Movements don't need politicians. They need people who mean what they say. Back in the hotel room, Lauren was at her laptop, organizing messages from advocacy groups. The inbox was flooded. ACLU, NAACP, community coalitions, offers to collaborate, requests to speak. A few cautious corporate liaisons even reached out privately, asking for input on training programs. Then, one message stood out, from CEO at skylixair.com. Subject, Let's meet. Her heart skipped. She opened the email. Mrs. Carter, I'm Michael Reynolds. I saw your video, and I saw the surveillance footage. What happened to you should not have happened. I want to sit down with you and your husband. No press, no lawyers, just truth. Michael, Lauren called James immediately. He wants to talk. The CEO. He's reaching out personally. James paused. Then it's time we stop being passengers. Let's be the ones setting the flight plan. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Emily watched the Carters' video again, and again. Her stomach turned. The couple's grace stood in stark contrast to her shame. But her guilt quickly morphed into something darker, resentment. She snapped her laptop shut and stood. Her roommate, Julia, glanced up from the couch. Are you okay? She asked cautiously. I'm fine, Emily said quickly. But they're not as perfect as they look. I know how these things work. Everyone loves the underdog until they learn who they really are. Julia narrowed her eyes. Emily, don't make this worse. Emily didn't respond. She had an idea, one that could discredit the Carters if she dug hard enough. She still knew people in the system, a cousin in private security, a friend in airline risk management. Maybe she couldn't save her job, but maybe she could take theirs. The Skylinks headquarters in Midtown Manhattan towered above the clouds like a temple of polished glass. Inside, the boardroom smelled faintly of leather and espresso. It was sterile, pristine, designed for control. But today, control belonged to someone else. Lauren adjusted her blazer as she and James stepped into the room. No cameras, no entourage, just them and CEO Michael Reynolds, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and unusually quiet for a man in his position. Thank you both for coming, he said, standing to greet them. Please, sit. No PR team, no legal filter, just me, and the truth. James offered a wary nod, settling across from the CEO. Then let's talk about how your airline almost humiliated us out of existence. Reynolds didn't flinch. I know what happened was wrong. I want to understand how it happened, and more importantly, how we stop it from happening again. Lauren interjected gently, her voice clear and precise. Then this has to be more than a press release, more than training modules and checklists. It has to mean something. Reynolds nodded, slowly folding his hands. "You're right. That's why I brought you here." Across town, Emily was on the phone in her cluttered apartment. Her voice shook with restrained bitterness. "Do you still have access to employee databases?" she asked the man on the other end, her cousin, Marcus, who worked in airline security. "What are you trying to do, Em?" he asked hesitantly. "This isn't like you." "They're not saints," she snapped. "Everyone's so busy praising them, but what do we even know about them? I just want to know the full story. Or you want revenge." Emily hesitated, her throat tightening. "I just want the truth." But even she didn't believe that anymore. Back at Skylink's HQ, Reynolds leaned forward. "We've suspended Emily permanently, but firing one person doesn't solve a cultural issue. Bias lives in systems. It's time we rebuild them." James and Lauren exchanged a glance. "Then let's rebuild," James said. "But not quietly. Not in the shadows." Lauren added, "Let this be the first company to publicly admit there's work to do, and show us the blueprint for how it's done." Reynolds nodded. "We'd like you to help design that blueprint. As paid consultants, direct input from the people most affected." Lauren blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't have the answers," Reynolds admitted, "but I believe you might." The moment sat heavy between them, the weight of possibility, the promise of impact. And, for the first time since Gate 12, Lauren felt something foreign but welcome: hope. That night, the Carters returned to their hotel. The city buzzed outside, but inside, everything was quiet. James collapsed onto the bed. Did that really happen? Lauren sat beside him, kicking off her heels. "It did. But it's not over. Now we do the hard part." He chuckled tiredly. "Changing the world before breakfast?" Something like that. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the dark, eyes locked on her screen. She scrolled through threads and messages, then stopped. An anonymous post had surfaced. A fake insider leak, suggesting the Carters had staged the encounter at Gate 12 for fame. The post had no evidence, just innuendo, but it was spreading fast. And Emily hadn't written it. She froze. Someone else was taking up her fight, escalating it. Her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. A text followed. "We can help each other. You want them discredited. We want them silenced." Emily stared at the screen, her hands trembling. What had she started? By morning, the internet was aflame. Anonymous posts flooded message boards and social media platforms. Conspiracy videos racked up hundreds of thousands of views, darkly accusing James and Lauren Carter of orchestrating the Gate 12 incident as a publicity stunt. Professional actors. Grifters. They were never discriminated against, just looking for attention. Lauren sat at the hotel desk, eyes glued to the screen, the glow from her laptop casting a pale light across her face. "Caught faking outrage for cash," she read aloud, bitterly. "This has over 1 million views. James, they're trying to erase everything we've done." James stood by the window, arms crossed, his reflection lost in the gray skyline. "It's calculated. Look how fast it spread. This wasn't organic." He turned toward her, voice tight. "It's coordinated." Lauren exhaled sharply. "Emily?" James shook his head. "Maybe. But this feels bigger, smarter." They were both right to be suspicious. 3 floors down, in a dim, co-working space, a man in a hoodie adjusted his webcam. His username, True Arrow Insider. His specialty, sowing chaos. He wasn't working alone. A rival airline had quietly hired a PR consultant to help exploit the scandal surrounding Skylinks, offering dirty money for digital destruction. He clicked upload on a doctored video clip, splicing moments of Lauren's calm response at the gate with unrelated footage to suggest staged drama. He smiled coldly as comments flooded in. The truth didn't matter anymore. Only the clicks did. Back in their suite, Lauren buried her face in her hands. "I don't know if I can do this." James knelt beside her, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to. We can walk away. Just raise Maya, get our lives back." Lauren lifted her head, eyes glassy. "But what if this is bigger than us now? What if walking away is the same as giving in?" He gently cupped her hand. "Then we don't walk away. We stand up." She nodded slowly, heart pounding. At Skylink's headquarters, CEO Michael Reynolds paced his office as PR Director Alyssa Gonzalez played the viral videos on loop. "This is a smear campaign," she said angrily. "None of this is legit, but the damage is real." Reynolds leaned on the desk, jaw clenched. "Have we confirmed it's coming from a rival?" Alyssa hesitated. "Not directly, but the metadata traces back to a marketing firm in Dallas, one known to work with Aerovista." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. The CEO of Aerovista was at the same investor summit. "They've been losing clients to us ever since we started the DEI reforms." "Sir," Alyssa added carefully, "we need a counter-narrative. Fast." He straightened. "Then give them the truth. Give the world what actually happened." Lauren and James met Reynolds and the Skylinks team that afternoon. No lawyers, no script. "Do you trust me?" Reynolds asked them. "No," Lauren answered bluntly, "but we trust the truth." That evening, Skylinks released the full, uncut security footage from Gate 12. Start to finish, no edits, no gaps. Alongside it, a public statement acknowledging the smear campaign, condemning targeted harassment, and reaffirming their commitment to equity and transparency. They included a video message from Lauren and James, calm, heartfelt, unrehearsed. "This was never about going viral," Lauren said, eyes steady. "It was about being treated with dignity. It still is." The impact was immediate. Celebrities, influencers, and community leaders began reposting the footage. Hashtags flipped from #GriftGate to #Gate12. Truth. News outlets corrected headlines. Talk shows invited James and Lauren to speak. But more importantly, strangers began reaching out. Hundreds, then thousands. People from all over the country who had lived through moments like Gate 12. Who had been silenced, ignored, doubted. Now they saw themselves in the Carters and found courage in their voice. But far from the cameras, Emily watched in horror as her narrative collapsed. The anonymous user, True Arrow Insider, had gone dark, deleting all traces. The PR firm vanished overnight. And her name was now permanently associated with the spark that lit the match. The worst part? She was starting to see herself clearly, and she didn't like what she saw. The morning sun rose behind the Manhattan skyline, but James and Lauren Carter barely noticed it. Their world had become a whirlwind of interviews, calls, and endless requests for comment. What began at Gate 12 had evolved into a national conversation, and they were now at the center of it. James rubbed his temples as he sat at their kitchen counter, phone buzzing with a dozen notifications. Lauren poured coffee, her face lined with exhaustion. CBS wants us live tomorrow morning. CNN asked again about primetime next week, he said softly. Lauren didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window, watching their daughter, Maya, color quietly at the dining table. "James," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we're losing ourselves in this." He looked up at her, eyes filled with concern. "You mean the press?" "I mean everything. The pressure, the noise, the way people look at us now, as symbols, not people." Later that day, they sat together on a studio set, the stage lights hot and unforgiving. The interviewer smiled politely, but the questions felt invasive. "So, Lauren," the anchor began, You've been hailed as the new face of anti-discrimination activism. Some say you're even more poised than Michelle Obama." Lauren's smile froze. She wasn't flattered. She was being packaged. "And James," the interviewer continued, "how does it feel to be America's woke husband? The man who stood up, stayed calm, and became a role model?" James let the words hang in the air before responding with quiet weight. "I didn't stand up to be a model. I stood up because my wife was being treated like she didn't belong, and I was tired of staying silent." Backstage, Lauren exhaled slowly. "I didn't sign up to be famous." James took her hand gently. "I didn't sign up to watch my wife hurt in public either." She looked at him with tired eyes. "I just want to go home. Our real home, not a green room." Meanwhile, across town, Michael Reynolds stared at his office window in silence. Alyssa, his PR chief, placed the latest poll data on his desk. Public trust in Skylinks is the highest it's been in years. Reynolds nodded but didn't smile. "And the Carters?" "Exhausted," she said. "Understandably." Reynolds sat down, his voice unusually quiet. "We owe them more than applause." That afternoon, he met James and Lauren in a quiet rooftop garden. No cameras, no press. "I wanted to thank you," Reynolds said, "and also apologize, not just for what happened, but for what came after." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "You mean the storm we got dragged into?" Reynolds nodded sincerely. "Exactly that." He handed them a folder. "We've created a new advisory board on racial bias and equity. It's not just for show. We want you to co-chair it, on your terms. Flexible hours, no press unless you want it. We want to build something real, with you." James flipped through the pages. Real plans, real funding, not just a PR stunt. Lauren looked at Reynolds. "Why us?" "Because you didn't just go viral. You told the truth, and people believed it." Back home, Maya tugged at her mom's sleeve. "Are you still on the news, Mommy?" Lauren bent down and smiled gently. "Sometimes, but not tonight. Tonight, we're just a family." Maya beamed. "Good. I missed just us time." So did they. A week had passed since the rooftop meeting. James and Lauren Carter had cautiously agreed to co-chair Skylink's new equity board, but only under the condition that the company's commitment wasn't performative. They wanted real change, not just headlines. Still, as they stepped into their first private session with the executive team, they sensed the tension beneath the pleasantries. Smiles were polite, but guarded. Words were agreeable, but distant. "You're brave for coming in here," whispered Daniel Huang, one of the few black executives in the room. His voice was supportive, but laced with warning. "Not everyone likes what you've started." Lauren gave him a knowing glance. "We're used to that." Elsewhere in the same building, Emily Parks, formerly known as flight attendant Emily Thompson, stood beside her attorney in a minimalist conference room, her hands trembling. "I want my job back," she snapped, voice laced with venom, "or at least enough money to rebuild my life." The attorney, a man named Russell Kane, was blunt. "You publicly profiled passengers, Emily. The videos hit over 20 million views. There's no public sympathy to leverage here." Emily's jaw clenched. This wasn't about racism. It was about gut instinct. Russell leaned forward. "Gut instinct doesn't hold up against federal lawsuits and corporate fallout. But," he paused, "what if we reposition the narrative? Spin this as a witch hunt. Say you were scapegoated by an airline desperate to save face. It won't get you reinstated, but it might damage their golden couple." Emily's eyes lit up with something dangerous. "Let's do it." The next morning, a headline blared across gossip blogs. "Ex-flight attendant speaks out. I was framed by Skylinks and the Carters." Lauren nearly choked on her tea when she read the headline. James paced the kitchen, voice tight with anger. "She's not just dragging us through the mud," he said, gripping the edge of the counter. "She's trying to rewrite the whole thing." Lauren stayed calm. Let her talk. The truth speaks louder. But the damage had begun. That afternoon, while Lauren sat in a panel on aviation ethics, a protester interrupted, shouting from the aisle, "Skylinks silences whistleblowers." Another yelled, "Tokenism doesn't fix systemic racism." Security rushed in. Chaos swelled. Lauren stood frozen as shouts echoed across the auditorium. The moment passed, but the sting remained. Outside, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Carter, care to comment on the growing backlash?" One barked. She lifted her chin. "I care about facts, not spin. If that makes me a target, so be it." Back at home, the exhaustion returned. James sat on the floor with Maya, trying to build a puzzle, but his eyes kept drifting to his phone. Lauren sat beside them and whispered, "You're slipping away again." He looked up guiltily. "I know. I thought we were done fighting." Lauren reached for his hand, her voice cracking. "We'll never be done, but we can choose how we fight." The following day, CEO Michael Reynolds called an emergency strategy meeting. He had the gossip headlines on one screen, protest footage on another, and social media outrage pulsing in real time. "We're not just managing optics anymore," he said gravely. "We're in a war for trust." Daniel Huang stood. "Then let's act like it. Release the full incident footage. Show the world what really happened. Uncut. No edits." Reynolds hesitated. "Are you sure?" Daniel nodded. "The Carters didn't start this storm, but they can help us weather it." And so, within 48 hours, Skylinks released the full security footage from Gate 12, capturing every detail. Emily's baseless accusations, Karen's calm intervention, and the Carters' grace under pressure. The public's reaction was immediate. Comments flooded in. "This clears everything. Emily's lies just blew up in her face. I was on the fence. Not anymore." As the sun set over New York, James and Lauren sat on their rooftop patio. The city buzzed below, but up here things were quiet, peaceful, for now. Lauren leaned against James, whispering, "Truth finds a way." He kissed her temple gently. "So do we." The days that followed the footage release were a whirlwind. Public opinion pivoted hard in favor of the Carters. Mainstream media began calling it a watershed moment for racial equity in aviation. Advocacy groups, who had once cautiously watched from the sidelines, now rallied behind them, and a wave of support poured in. Still, Lauren didn't celebrate. Not yet. "There's always a second storm," she whispered to James late one night as they sat at their kitchen table surrounded by stacks of letters from strangers. Some were thank you notes. Others were stories of pain, shared by those who had experienced similar discrimination. James nodded slowly, eyes scanning a handwritten letter from a retired pilot who admitted he'd once made the same assumptions Emily had. "People are waking up," he said, "but some are waking up angry." In a dim office across town, Emily stared blankly at her laptop. The footage had backfired. Her truth had collapsed under the weight of evidence. Her attorney dropped her case. Her GoFundMe was suspended. The comments turned cruel on her pages, in her inbox, even outside her apartment door. "You deserve everything you got. Racist and a liar. Hope you never work again." She hadn't imagined it would unravel this fast. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Emily Parks?" the voice asked. "Who is this?" "My name's Logan Barrett. I run PR and strategy for a certain group of like-minded executives. People who aren't thrilled with the direction Skylinks is taking." Emily sat straighter. Logan continued smoothly. "We think there's still a way for you to recover. But more importantly, we think it's time someone reminded the Carters they can't change the world overnight." Meanwhile, at Skylinks HQ, the Carters met with CEO Michael Reynolds and a small task force to finalize their first round of company-wide reforms, implicit bias training, anonymous incident reporting, and a new executive review board with diverse oversight. Daniel Huang led the presentation. This is only step one. We're not fixing decades of imbalance overnight, but if we don't lead the change, someone else will. Michael leaned back, eyes tired but hopeful. We're going to be tested for this. Count on it. I'm not afraid of tests, Lauren said firmly. I'm afraid of silence. James smiled, squeezing her hand beneath the table. The next morning, an anonymous video was posted on a fringe news site. Grainy, voice distorted, edited clips of the Carters' private conversations taken wildly out of context. The message: Skylinks is being manipulated. The Carters are power-hungry. They don't care about real passengers. It spread fast among corners of the internet eager for backlash. Conspiracy influencers fanned the flames. Threats trickled into Skylinks' inbox. The boardroom grew tense. Who leaked this? Reynolds barked during an emergency meeting. Not internal, Daniel responded. It was pieced together from surveillance and ambient recordings. Someone's been following them. The room fell silent. At home, James and Lauren sat side by side, watching the damage unfold online. They're trying to turn us into villains, James whispered. Lauren looked straight ahead, her voice steady. Then let's remind them who we really are. That night, the Carters released a video of their own, simple, unpolished, just the two of them sitting in their living room. No scripts, no talking points. We aren't perfect, Lauren said softly, but we've told the truth. We're standing here not for publicity, but for progress. James added, if fighting for fairness makes us a threat, so be it, because real change starts with uncomfortable truths. The message was raw, human. It struck a nerve. Within hours, the tide turned again. Stand with the Carters trended nationwide. Even major celebrities and civic leaders reposted the video, praising their courage. But behind the curtain, Emily met with Logan Barrett in a private co-working suite downtown. Logan leaned over a map and a whiteboard with their next steps. You failed, he said flatly. We're taking this over now. Emily, red-eyed and resentful, didn't argue. Logan circled a date on the board. Skylink's shareholder summit is in 3 weeks. We'll push a motion to oust Reynolds, and with him gone, so go the Carters. And if it doesn't work? Emily asked quietly. Logan smiled thinly. Then we burn the whole brand down. The tension at Skylink's HQ was electric. 3 weeks until the shareholder summit, and the boardroom felt like a storm cloud waiting to burst. CEO Michael Reynolds, usually composed, now wore the tight expression of a man watching every step with measured caution. Logan Barrett is making his move, Daniel Huang informed the executive team one morning. He's rallying the older shareholders, spinning the Carters' involvement as a liability, claims we're alienating our core customer base. Reynolds sighed deeply. The same base that has steadily declined for 5 years? Barrett's betting on fear, Daniel continued. Fear sells faster than progress. Lauren and James Carter were briefed in the afternoon. They listened silently, hands locked beneath the table. So, this is it? James asked finally. Either Skylinks stands behind the changes, or we get erased with them. Exactly, Reynolds said. The vote will be close. Lauren's eyes sharpened. Then we don't just defend. We remind them who we are and who they could be. Behind closed doors, Logan Barrett was busy orchestrating a carefully timed narrative. High-end ads targeted to shareholders promised a return to tradition. Anonymous op-eds criticized the hyper-politicization of air travel. And in back-channel meetings, Logan promised board members higher dividends under his leadership. Emily sat in on one of the meetings, tight-lipped. She was no longer the voice. She was the symbol, a warning, a rallying point. Logan looked over at her. "You're still useful," he said flatly. "Don't speak unless spoken to." Emily bit her tongue. She had gone too far to back out now, but part of her wondered if even Logan would discard her once he had what he needed. Lauren Carter knew how to speak without shouting. With just days left before the summit, she and James agreed to attend a private town hall streamed exclusively for shareholders. No rehearsed script, no handlers, just two people explaining why they stood for the future. "Every time we walk into an airport now," James began, "people stare, not because we're celebrities, but because they see themselves in us, people who once went unheard." Lauren followed, calm and unshaken. "We're not here to burn down the airline. We're here to rebuild trust. That's good business, that's smart business, and it's the right thing to do." Their message rippled across investment forums. Some labeled it naive idealism. Others called it bold vision. But more importantly, it made the undecided shareholders hesitate. The night before the vote, Lauren stood alone on their apartment balcony, city lights reflecting in her eyes. "You okay?" James asked softly, stepping beside her. She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking, this isn't just about us anymore. If they erase this effort now, what message does that send to every kid who's been told their voice doesn't matter?" James wrapped his arms around her. "Then we make sure they can't erase it." At the summit the next morning, the atmosphere was razor-thin with tension. Logan Barrett took the stage, perfectly timed slides behind him. He spoke of stability, corporate identity, and responsible leadership. When he introduced the motion to remove CEO Reynolds, a silence fell over the crowd. The vote began. It was then Reynolds stood. "I won't campaign to save my job," he said, voice steady, "but I will defend the direction we've chosen. We had the chance to be better, not because someone forced us, but because we listened." He paused. "This company is more than revenue. It's what we leave in our wake." Then he stepped back and let the shareholders decide. The final count was close, painfully close. But the motion failed. Skylinks kept its CEO and its commitment to change. Logan Barrett stood silently as the room erupted in restrained relief. His jaw flexed, but he nodded curtly and left without another word. Emily was gone before the doors even opened. Outside, in the quiet hallway, Reynolds found Lauren and James waiting. "You just changed the future," he said. "Not just of this airline, but this entire industry." Lauren smiled, tired but hopeful. "We weren't alone. People stood with us." He nodded. "Now, let's prove them right." The days following the shareholder summit felt like the calm after a long, turbulent flight. But for James and Lauren Carter, the work was far from over. With Skylink's leadership intact and the reforms still in motion, they now faced the challenge of making change permanent, across not just one airline, but the entire industry. Lauren sat in a meeting room overlooking the tarmac at JFK International Airport. She watched the planes take off one by one, each ascent reminding her that visibility was no longer enough. They had to soar higher. Across the table sat Skylinks' new Chief Inclusion Officer, a position created in direct response to their advocacy. "Lauren, we've approved a budget for national outreach," the executive explained. "We want to partner with organizations already fighting for equity in travel, start with real community engagement." James, sitting beside her, added, "We also want to create scholarships, aviation, engineering, hospitality. Open the gates for kids who never thought they'd belong in this world." The executive smiled warmly. "That's exactly why we brought you in." At home, their living room slowly morphed into a campaign headquarters. Folders, sticky notes, and color-coded calendars now filled the space once reserved for rest. "You're running a movement now," James teased gently, dropping off coffee at Lauren's elbow. She exhaled. And I still don't know what I'm doing half the time. You're doing exactly what needs to be done, he replied sincerely, even if no one's done it before. The Carters began speaking at universities, trade schools, and industry conventions. Not as activists, but as professionals who had lived through the system and dared to demand more. They launched the Lift Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing diversity in transportation leadership. "We're not here for headlines," Lauren told a crowd at Georgetown University. "We're here so the next generation doesn't have to go viral to be treated with basic dignity." Meanwhile, Skylinks unveiled a new internal program, Perspective Flights, a rotating mentorship initiative that paired executives with frontline employees for a week at a time. "Until you've handled a crying child at 30,000 feet or explained a delay to a family on their way to a funeral, you don't understand service," said CEO Michael Reynolds during the launch. Former detractors inside the company began to come around, not because they were pressured, but because they saw the difference. Even skeptics couldn't ignore the data. Customer satisfaction was up, employee retention improved, and new pilot trainees were more diverse than ever. And then came the moment that stopped Lauren in her tracks. She received an envelope marked with the FAA seal. Inside, a letter congratulated her on her appointment to the National Advisory Board for Equal Access in Aviation. The same agency that once treated her as just another passenger now saw her as a voice of influence. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed the letter to James. He read it silently, then looked up with a proud, glassy-eyed smile. "You're changing more than policy," he said softly. "You're rewriting the future." They had weathered the whispers, the resistance, even the attempts to erase them. And now, instead of fading into a feel-good headline, they were embedded in the architecture of change. But there were still critics. In anonymous comments and half-hearted op-eds, some still argued they had politicized the skies. Lauren didn't respond to those. She focused instead on the girl who stopped her in the terminal last week. "Are you that woman from the video?" she asked shyly, clutching her mother's hand. "Yes," Lauren said, kneeling to eye level. "Do you want to fly one day?" The girl nodded eagerly. "Then you make sure the world hears your voice, loud and clear." The late spring sun filtered through the massive glass panels at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting warm reflections across Gate C-12. But this time, it wasn't just another flight. It was a launch of something far more enduring than any trip through the clouds. James Carter adjusted his tie nervously as he stood at the podium. "I never thought I'd be giving a speech at an airport gate," he said with a modest grin, drawing light laughter from the crowd gathered behind velvet ropes, "especially not one that changed everything for my wife and me." Lauren stood beside him, holding his hand. Not for show, not for the cameras, but because it was still the only anchor she ever needed when her voice threatened to waver. Behind them hung a banner. The Lift Initiative. Equity in every aisle. Below it stood a group of newly appointed Flight Academy students. Diverse, determined, and wearing fresh uniforms that represented the future. "We began this journey as two travelers, just trying to get to our destination," Lauren said, her voice steadier now. "But that day at Gate C-12, it became the start of something none of us could have planned, something we all needed more than we realized." In the months since their story went viral, the world hadn't exactly changed overnight, but little by little, the cracks in the industry had been addressed. Not perfectly, not completely, but persistently. More airlines adopted bias incident response units. Gate agents were now trained not just in customer service, but cultural competency. And a national policy task force was working to establish a passenger equity bill, modeled in part after Lauren and James's experiences. Still, some days brought resistance. There were threats, hate mail, smirking commentators who called it just another PR stunt. But those voices were fading. Because louder still were the letters from high schoolers who now dreamed of becoming pilots, from single moms who boarded first class with confidence, from veterans who finally saw dignity where once there was doubt. After the ceremony, the couple stepped away for a quiet moment on an observation deck. "You think we did enough?" James asked, gazing out as a Skylinks jet rumbled down the runway. Lauren leaned into him, watching the plane ascend. "I think we did what we were supposed to," she said, "and we left the gate open for others to rise." He nodded, a peaceful pride settling in his chest. Then, as if the moment had waited for them, a voice came over the intercom. "Final boarding call for Skylinks Flight 721 to Washington, D.C. Their next stop, a meeting with the Department of Transportation to help shape federal standards on airline accountability. Another fight, another phase, but this time they weren't just showing up. They were invited. As they walked to their gate, hand in hand, a little boy tugged at Lauren's sleeve. "Are you the people from the airplane video?" he asked softly. Lauren smiled. "Yes, we are." The boy's father leaned in. "He wants to be a pilot. He saw what happened. And he said if you could be brave, so could he." Lauren knelt, locking eyes with the child. "Then you fly," she said with quiet conviction. "You fly higher than any of us ever did." They boarded Flight 721, not as symbols, not as headlines, but as passengers, just like everyone else. But their names now carried more than baggage tags. They carried hope. As the plane soared into a sky streaked with orange and gold, James turned to Lauren, whispering something only she could hear. "You were always my destination." Her eyes sparkled. "And you've always been my wings." They looked out of the window together. Below them, a country was changing. Above them, their story continued. And somewhere, at a gate not far from where it all began, someone else was boarding their full light, ready to rise.